My mom is dying. Only your blood can save her. He dropped
My mom
everything
is
and ran
dying.
the
Only
moment
your
he
blood can
heard
save her.
and ran. A great love story. Hi, my beautiful, precious family. Let's begin with a prayer from the deepest part of my heart. Dear God, please place your healing hand upon me and bless every soul listening now. Fill their homes with peace, their hearts with joy, and their lives with overflowing love. Amen. This is your Mr. Peter. Even while I've been away, I've felt your love in every heartbeat. You are not just subscribers, you are my family, my strength, and the reason I keep going. To all my lovely new family members, welcome home. Please tell me in the comments, what led you to this channel? And which story touched your heart the most? I truly want to know you. Your story matters here. Now here's the good news. I'll be back tomorrow, stronger, smiling, and ready to be with you again, with all the love in my heart. And please remember, if you see my videos on other channels, they are stolen. This is the only true Mr. Peter channel. Let's protect our home together. Before we begin, just one little favor. Please like, comment, and stay till the end. If the intro feels long, skip it, but please never skip the story. Your love keeps this family alive. Now, while I prepare to return, James is here with today's beautiful story. Let's enjoy it together, heart to heart, hand in hand.
Gary Thomas had built his empire on the principle that every call after 9 p.m. was either a crisis or an opportunity. He never expected it to be both. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, 37 floors above the city that never slept, but somehow always felt empty. At 44, Gary had everything a man was supposed to want: a multi-million-dollar consulting empire, a penthouse that graced magazine covers, and a reputation that made CEOs across the country seek his counsel. Yet, as he sat surrounded by merger documents and acquisition reports, the silence felt heavier than the storm clouds gathering outside. His phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. Unknown number, area code from some small southern town he'd never heard of. Gary almost sent it to voicemail. After all, genuine emergencies came through his assistant, Chenoa Cross, who guarded his private number like a state secret. But something made him pause, perhaps the same instinct that had built his fortune, and he swiped to answer. Gary Thomas. Mr. Thomas? The voice was young, male, trembling with barely controlled desperation. You don't know me, but my mother is dying. Only your blood can save her. Gary's hand tightened around the phone. In his world of corporate negotiations and strategic acquisitions, people often spoke in life-or-death terms about deals and market shares. But something in this boy's voice cut through every defense Gary had built around his heart. I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong number. Please don't hang up. The words rushed out in a torrent of fear and hope. My name is Kane Tulin. I'm 15 and I've been researching for weeks. You donated blood at State University 15 years ago, right? They said you had AB negative with the Duffy negative factor. Gary's breath caught. He did remember those college donations. Desperate for pizza money, he'd discovered his blood was rare enough to command premium compensation. How did you get this number? I found your information in some old papers my mom kept. Look, I know this sounds crazy, but she has this autoimmune condition that's attacking her blood cells. The doctors tried everything. Steroids, immunosuppressors, even experimental treatments. Nothing worked. They said she needs fresh blood from someone with her exact type, but it's like 1 in 50,000 people. The boy's voice cracked, and Gary found himself leaning forward, his attention completely captured by this stranger's pain. The hospitals put out calls to every blood bank in 3 states. Nobody has what she needs, but your old donation records showed the exact markers. Mr. Thomas, please, she's all I have. She's all my sister has. Without this transfusion. The words hung in the air, unfinished but devastatingly clear. Gary set down his gold pen, the merger documents suddenly seeming like pieces of meaningless paper. What's your mother's name? Dawn, dawn to Lan. The world stopped spinning. Gary's hand moved to his chest where his heart had just forgotten how to beat properly. Dawn. The name he'd whispered in empty rooms for 15 years. The woman who'd vanished from his life like morning mist, leaving only a note that still lived in his wallet. I can't be the woman you need me to be. Please don't look for me. Mr. Thomas, are you there? Gary's voice, when it finally came, sounded like it belonged to someone else. Where are you? Millbrook. It's about 4 hours south of you. Mercy General Hospital. Mr. Thomas, do you know my mother? The question hit Gary like a physical blow. Did he know Dawn? He'd known the curve of her smile and the way she hummed while cooking breakfast. He'd known how she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, and how she laughed at old movies that weren't even funny. He'd known the feel of her hand in his, and the sound of her breathing when she slept, curled against his chest. But apparently, he hadn't known her at all. Yes, Gary said quietly. I knew your mother a long time ago. Then you'll come? Please, the doctor said she has maybe a week, but I think it might be less. She's been asking for someone to take care of us if something happens to her. She doesn't know I'm calling you. Gary was already moving, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against marble floors as he paced to the window. The city sprawled below him, millions of lights representing millions of lives, but none of them mattered anymore. Somewhere 4 hours south, the only woman he'd ever truly loved was dying. I'll be there tomorrow. Tomorrow, hope exploded in the boy's voice. Really? You'll really come? I'm leaving tonight. Mr. Thomas, thank you. Thank you so much. I wasn't sure I didn't know if you'd even remember her. Remember her. Gary closed his eyes and saw Dawn's face as clearly as if she were standing beside him. Rich, brown skin glowing in morning sunlight, eyes that held depths he'd spent months trying to fathom, lips that curved into smiles meant just for him. He'd searched for her for 2 years after she left, hired the best investigators money could buy, followed every lead until they all ended in empty rooms and disconnected phone numbers. I remember her, Gary said, his voice thick with 15 years of unanswered questions. Kane, I need you to text me the hospital information. I'll be there as soon as I can. I will. And Mr. Thomas, thank you for not hanging up. The line went dead, leaving Gary standing in his empty office with the phone in his hand and his entire world shifting beneath his feet. Through the window, the storm was intensifying, lightning illuminating the sky in brief, brilliant flashes that reminded him of the last night he'd spent with Dawn. She'd been afraid of thunder, and he'd held her close while she whispered her dreams about their future together. Gary moved with the efficiency that had built his empire, but now every action served a different master. He called Chenoa, waking her despite the late hour. Sir? Is everything all right? Cancel everything. All meetings, the Morrison acquisition, the board presentation on Friday. Everything. Sir, the Morrison deal closes Friday. If we don't, handle it yourself or postpone it. I don't care about the Morrison deal. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. In 15 years, Gary had never canceled a major deal. His reputation was built on reliability, on being the man who showed up no matter what. How long will you be gone? Chenoa asked carefully. Gary looked around his office, awards lining the walls, photos with politicians and celebrities, evidence of a life built on success and ambition. None of it felt real anymore. I don't know. He packed a single bag with hands that moved automatically while his mind reeled with memories. Dawn's laugh echoing through his college apartment. The way she'd curl up in his reading chair with textbooks spread around her like flower petals. Her voice soft and certain, the night she'd told him she loved him. And then the morning he'd woken to find her gone, nothing left but wrinkled sheets and a note that had torn his world apart. Gary loaded his bag into his BMW and pulled out of the parking garage into the storm. Rain lashed the windshield as he drove through empty streets, heading for the highway that would take him back to the only woman who'd ever made him understand what the word home really meant. 4 hours. In 4 hours, he'd see Dawn again. He pressed harder on the accelerator, racing through the night toward a hospital room where the past and present were about to collide, where a woman he'd never stopped loving lay dying, and where a 16-year-old boy who'd called him for help might just be the son he'd never known he had. The storm followed him south, lightning illuminating the road ahead in stark, brilliant flashes that felt like destiny calling him home. Chapter 2. Ghosts in the Hospital. The automatic doors of Mercy General Hospital whispered open like a confession, releasing the antiseptic scent of hope and heartbreak that Gary remembered from the darkest night of his childhood. He'd driven through the storm for 4 hours, caffeine and adrenaline keeping him alert as lightning split the sky and rain hammered his windshield. Now, standing in the fluorescent bright lobby at 6 in the morning, Gary felt the weight of 15 years pressing down on his shoulders like a physical thing. Somewhere in this building, Dawn was fighting for her life, and he was about to see the woman who'd haunted his dreams and shaped every relationship that had failed since she'd left. Mr. Thomas. Gary turned to find a young man rising from a vinyl chair near the information desk. The boy was tall and lean, with the kind of natural athleticism that suggested basketball courts and weekend games. But it was his face that stopped Gary's heart. The strong jawline that Gary saw in his own mirror, the intelligent eyes that held Dawn's warmth but carried a gravity that spoke of responsibility shouldered too young. Kane? Yes, sir. The boy extended his hand with the kind of formal politeness that came from being raised by a single mother who believed manners mattered. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure. I mean, when I called, I thought maybe I told you I'd be here. Gary shook the boy's hand, startled by the firm grip and the way Kane met his eyes directly. There was something achingly familiar about the gesture, something that made Gary's chest tighten with recognition he wasn't ready to acknowledge. How is she? Kane's composure cracked slightly. Not good. She had a bad night. Her oxygen levels dropped, and they had to move her to the ICU. The doctor said. He swallowed hard. He said we might be running out of time. Gary felt the floor shift beneath him. Take me to her. They walked through corridors painted in soothing pastels that fooled no one, past rooms where families kept vigil, and hope was measured in the steady beep of monitors. Gary noticed how the nursing staff nodded to Kane, how they spoke to him with the kind of gentle respect usually reserved for adults. This boy had been living in hospitals, Gary realized, watching his mother fight for her life while trying to hold their small family together. Mr. Thomas, Kane said as they waited for the elevator, can I ask you something? Of course. How well did you know my mom? Gary looked at this young man who carried his jawline and Dawn's eyes and felt the truth hovering between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. But this wasn't his revelation to make, not yet. We dated in college. We were serious about each other. Kane nodded slowly, processing this information with the kind of careful thought that reminded Gary painfully of himself at that age. The elevator doors opened on the 4th floor, and Gary followed Kane down a quieter corridor where the lighting was softer and the sound of monitors created a subtle symphony of lives hanging in the balance. Room 427 sat at the end of the hall, its door partially open to reveal the controlled chaos of ICU life. She's in there, Kane said quietly. But Mr. Thomas, she doesn't know I called you. And she might not. She might not be happy to see you. Gary nodded, understanding more than the boy realized. Dawn had left him once without explanation. There was no reason to believe his appearance would be welcome now, even if it might save her life. He approached the doorway slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. Through the gap, he could see a hospital bed surrounded by machines that blinked and hummed with mechanical precision. And there, looking impossibly small beneath white sheets, was Dawn. 15 years collapsed into nothing. She was thinner than he remembered, her rich brown skin appearing almost translucent against the stark hospital linens. Her hair, once long enough to brush her shoulders, was now cut in a short, practical style that framed her face like a dark halo. Even unconscious, even fighting for her life, she was the most beautiful woman Gary had ever seen. "Dawn," he whispered, his hand rising to touch the glass that separated the corridor from her room. She must have heard something, the sound of her name, or maybe just the presence of someone familiar, because her eyelids fluttered, then opened. Her gaze found his through the doorway, and Gary watched recognition hit her like a physical blow. Her heart monitor began beeping faster, the green lines spiking into erratic patterns that brought a nurse hurrying to her bedside. "Dawn, honey, you need to stay calm," the nurse said, checking the machines with practiced efficiency. Pavati Nakamura, according to her name tag, was a small woman with kind eyes and gentle hands. "Your heart rate's elevated. Are you in pain?" Dawn's gaze never left Gary's face. Her lips moved, forming words too quiet for him to hear, but the monitor told the story of her distress clearly enough. Gary stepped back from the doorway, but it was too late. Dawn had seen him, and the shock was written in the erratic rhythm of her heartbeat and the way her hands gripped the bed rails like she was trying to anchor herself to reality. "I think I should go," Gary said to Kane, but the boy caught his arm. "No, please, she needs your blood. Whatever happened between you two, she needs you now." Dr. Lonan Blackwell appeared as if summoned, a distinguished man in his 50s with silver hair, and the kind of calm authority that came from years of delivering impossible news with compassion. He looked between Gary and Kane with knowing eyes. "You must be Mr. Thomas. I'm Dr. Blackwell. Kane has told me about your blood type. What does she need?" "A full transfusion, possibly multiple sessions. Her body is attacking her own red blood cells faster than we can replace them with standard donors. We need blood with very specific markers, AB negative with the Duffy negative antigen, and a rare RH variant." Gary nodded, already rolling up his sleeve. "Test me. Now. We'll need to run a full compatibility panel, but based on your previous donation records, you should be a perfect match." As they prepared to draw his blood, Gary could hear Dawn's voice from her room, weak but insistent. "I don't want him here. Please, just make him leave." The words hit Gary like physical blows, but he kept his arm extended as the needle slid into his vein. His blood flowed into vials that would determine if he could save the woman who'd never wanted to see him again. "Why?" he asked Doctor Blackwell quietly. "Why would she refuse help if she knows she's dying?" "Fear," the doctor replied with the wisdom of someone who'd seen pride and terror battle for supremacy countless times. Sometimes people would rather die than face the things that scare them most. Gary looked toward Dawn's room, where he could see her profile against the pillow, her face turned away from the door. She was afraid of him. After all these years, after everything they'd shared, his presence terrified her more than death itself. "The results will take about an hour, Doctor," Blackwell said, labeling the vials with careful precision. "But Mr. Thomas, I need to prepare you. Even if you're a perfect match, she's very sick. This isn't just about replacing her blood. Her immune system is in chaos. Recovery will take time if it comes at all." "I understand. Do you? Because that young man has been living in this hospital for 2 weeks, watching his mother fade away. He's barely 16, and he's trying to hold his family together while facing the possibility of losing the most important person in his world. Whatever history you have with his mother, don't give him hope unless you're absolutely certain you can deliver." Gary looked at Kane, who was standing by the window, staring out at the small town below. The boy's shoulders were set with determination, but Gary could see the fear in the rigid line of his spine, the way his hands pressed against the glass, as if he could hold the world steady through sheer will. "I'm not going anywhere," Gary said quietly. "Whatever happens, I'm not leaving." Dr. Blackwell studied him for a long moment. "I hope that's true, because that family has been abandoned enough." As the doctor walked away, Gary sank into a waiting room chair and closed his eyes. Through the wall, he could hear the soft beep of Dawn's monitors, the mechanical rhythm that was keeping track of her heartbeat, her breathing, her chances. He'd come here to save her, but sitting in this hospital corridor with antiseptic air filling his lungs and her rejection still echoing in his ears, Gary realized that saving Dawn might require more than just his blood. It might require facing the truth about why she'd left him, what he'd failed to understand 15 years ago, and whether the man he'd become was worthy of the second chance he desperately wanted, but might never deserve. Chapter 3. What We Left Behind. The hospital cafeteria coffee tasted like regret and sleepless nights, but Gary held the styrofoam cup like it was an anchor keeping him tethered to a world that had shifted beneath his feet. 2 hours had passed since his blood was drawn, 2 hours of sitting in vinyl chairs that squeaked with every movement while listening to the distant hum of machines keeping Dawn alive. The test results weren't back yet, but Gary already knew what they would show. His blood would be a perfect match, just as it had been 15 years ago when their bodies had fit together like pieces of the same puzzle. The irony wasn't lost on him that his blood might save the woman who'd broken his heart. "Mr. Thomas?" Gary looked up to find a woman approaching his table, her presence commanding attention even in the sterile environment of the hospital cafeteria. She was tall and elegant, with the kind of natural grace that spoke of inner strength rather than studied poise. Her dark skin held a warmth that reminded him painfully of Dawn, and her eyes held the shrewd intelligence of someone who'd spent years reading people's deepest truths. "I'm Ayanna Beaumont," she said, settling into the chair across from him without waiting for an invitation. "Dawn's best friend since we were 14 years old." Gary straightened, recognizing the protective steel beneath her polite introduction. "You know who I am." "Oh, I know exactly who you are, Gary Thomas. I'm the one who held Dawn while she cried for 3 months after you disappeared from her life. I'm the one who drove her to the clinic when she found out she was pregnant and was too scared to go alone. I'm the one who helped her pack up her entire life and move to a new town where nobody would ask questions about the baby's father." Each word hit Gary like a physical blow. Pregnant. Dawn had been pregnant when she left him. "I didn't disappear," Gary said quietly, his voice hoarse with shock. "She left me. I woke up one morning and she was gone, just a note saying she couldn't be the woman I needed." Ayanna studied him with the kind of penetrating gaze that came from years of working with people in crisis. As a social worker, she'd learned to see through carefully constructed facades to the pain beneath. "Did you ever wonder why she left? Every day for 15 years. But did you ever really think about it? About what might have scared her enough to run from the man she was planning to marry?" Gary's hands tightened around his coffee cup. "We talked about marriage. We made plans. I was going to propose after graduation once my business got established. We discussed waiting a few years to have children, making sure we were financially stable first." "Ah." Ayanna leaned back in her chair, and Gary saw understanding flicker in her eyes. "There it is. There what is? The moment you lost her without even realizing it." Gary felt like he was trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. "I don't understand." "She was already pregnant, Gary. When you were making your careful plans about waiting a few years for children, she was carrying your baby and terrified to tell you because you'd made it clear that a child would disrupt your timeline. The words hit Gary like a freight train. He set down his coffee cup with shaking hands, his mind racing back to those final weeks with Dawn. Had there been signs? Moments when she'd seemed distant, worried, like she was carrying a secret too heavy to share. She thought I wouldn't want the baby. She thought you'd see it as a mistake, an inconvenience, something that would derail your carefully planned future. Gary buried his face in his hands, 15 years of confusion suddenly crystallizing into devastating clarity. Dawn hadn't left because she didn't love him. She'd left because she loved him too much to trap him with a responsibility he'd explicitly said he wasn't ready for. "I would have wanted our child," he said quietly. "I would have wanted any child that was part of her." "Would you? Really?" Ayana's voice was gentle but uncompromising. "Because the Gary Thomas she described to me was ambitious, driven, completely focused on building his empire, a man who had his life planned out in 5-year increments and didn't appreciate surprises." Gary wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in his throat because they were true. At 29, he'd been laser-focused on success, on building the kind of business that would set him apart from his middle-class upbringing. He'd loved Dawn completely, but he'd also loved his plans, his timeline, his vision of their perfectly orchestrated future. "What happened to her?" Gary asked. "After she left, what happened?" Ayana's expression softened slightly. She was brave. Braver than you probably ever imagined. She enrolled in nursing school while pregnant, worked 2 jobs to pay for it, lived in a tiny apartment above a bakery where the owner let her pay rent by working early morning shifts. Gary closed his eyes, imagining Dawn heavy with his child, kneading bread dough before dawn to make ends meet. She had Kane alone. No family in town, no support system except for the midwife who delivered him and a neighbor who watched him while Dawn studied. She graduated nursing school with a 3-month-old baby and the highest GPA in her class. And she never told him about me. What was she supposed to say? That his father was a man who'd made it clear children weren't part of his immediate plans? That she'd run away rather than burden him with an unplanned pregnancy? Gary felt sick, not from the hospital coffee, but from the weight of understanding how thoroughly he'd failed the woman he'd loved most. His carefully planned life, his strategic approach to their relationship, all of it had created an environment where Dawn felt she couldn't trust him with the most important news of their lives. She raised him alone. Not completely alone. She met a good man when Kane was 5, Marcus. He wanted to adopt Kane, give him his name, be the father Kane had never had. Dawn almost said yes. Gary's heart clenched. What stopped her? Kane did. He was old enough to have opinions by then, and he told Dawn he didn't want a new name. He said maybe his real father would come looking for him someday, and he wanted to be easy to find. The image of a 5-year-old boy clinging to hope for a father who didn't even know he existed broke something inside Gary's chest. Marcus left after that. Said he couldn't build a life with a woman whose child was waiting for another man. Dawn hasn't dated seriously since. Because of me. Because I ruined her chances at happiness. Because she chose her son over her own loneliness. Because she decided that some kinds of love are worth protecting, even when they cost you everything else. Gary stared across the cafeteria, watching families navigate crisis together, and realized he'd been living a half-life for 15 years, while Dawn had been building something real and meaningful without him. Does Kane know? About you being his father? He figured it out last year. Dawn kept some papers from college, transcripts, old photos. Kane's smart, and he looks just like you. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. And Dawn? Does she know that he knows? She suspects, but they've never talked about it directly. Dawn spent 16 years protecting him from the father who might reject him. She's not about to force that conversation now. Dr. Blackwell appeared at their table, holding a manila folder that contained Gary's test results and Dawn's future. Mr. Thomas, your blood work is back. You're a perfect match. Better than perfect, actually. Your blood has antibodies that could help Dawn's immune system reset itself. Gary stood immediately. When can we do the transfusion? That's the problem. Dawn is refusing treatment if it involves your blood. She's asking us to keep looking for other donors. There are no other donors, Ayanna said quietly. Not with his specific markers. I've explained that to her, but she's competent to make her own medical decisions, and she's refusing. Gary felt the world tilting again. Dawn would rather die than accept his help. Can I see her? Dr. Blackwell hesitated. She specifically asked that you not be allowed in her room. Please, 5 minutes. Let me talk to her. Gary, Ayanna said gently, she's scared. More scared than you can possibly imagine. Seeing you again brings back 15 years of pain she's worked very hard to move past. Then help me understand what I need to do. Help me understand what she needs from me. Ayanna studied his face for a long moment, searching for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. She needs to know that you're not here to disrupt her life or take her son away from her. She needs to know that you understand the choice she made and why she made it. And most of all, she needs to know that you're not going to disappear again the moment things get complicated. Gary looked toward the elevator that would take him to Dawn's floor, to the woman who was dying rather than accept his help, to the son he'd never known existed. I'm not going anywhere, he said quietly. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'm not leaving. Then prove it, Ayanna said. But Gary, don't expect her to believe you right away. She's spent 16 years building a life that doesn't depend on you. You're going to have to earn your place in it. Chapter 4. Blood and Truth. The call came at midnight, pulling Gary from the restless half-sleep that had become his companion since arriving in Millbrook 3 days ago. Mr. Thomas, it's Kane. Can you meet me somewhere? I need to talk to you about something important. Gary sat up in the narrow bed of his hotel room, immediately alert. Is your mother all right? She's stable, but there's something I need to tell you. Something about why she really left you. 20 minutes later, Gary found himself sitting across from Kane in Rosie's Diner, a small 24-hour restaurant that seemed to exist in a time capsule from the 1950s. Red vinyl booths, black and white checkered floors, and a jukebox that probably still played Elvis. It was the kind of place where secrets were shared over coffee that was always too strong and pie that was always too sweet. Kane looked older than his 15 years in the harsh fluorescent lighting, his face drawn with the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying burdens too heavy for young shoulders. He clutched a worn manila envelope like it contained either salvation or destruction. I've been thinking about what to say for 3 days, Kane began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Ever since you walked into that hospital, I've been trying to figure out how to tell you this. Gary waited, his coffee growing cold as he studied the boy's face, his own jawline, Dawn's intelligent eyes, and something indefinably familiar in the way he tilted his head when concentrating. My mom never talks about my father. Never. When I was little and asked about him, she'd just say he was a good man who wasn't ready to be a father. When I got older and pressed for details, she'd get this look in her eyes, not angry, just sad. Like talking about him hurt her in ways she couldn't explain. Kane opened the envelope and pulled out a photograph that he slid across the Formica table. Gary's breath caught as he recognized it immediately. him and Dawn at a college football game, both wearing university sweatshirts, both laughing at something off camera. Dawn was looking at Gary with such obvious adoration that it made his chest ache to see it. I found this in Mom's jewelry box last year when I was looking for her insurance papers after she got sick the first time. It was wrapped in tissue paper with some other things: ticket stubs, a pressed flower, a letter that was never sent. Gary picked up the photograph with trembling fingers. He remembered that day perfectly. Their team had won in overtime, and they'd celebrated by walking around campus hand in hand, making plans for their future that had seemed as solid and certain as the ground beneath their feet. The date on the ticket stub was September 15th, Kane continued. I was born May 3rd the following year. That's exactly 37 weeks later. The math hit Gary like a physical blow. He stared at this young man sitting across from him, seeing suddenly not just familiar features, but the complete picture they formed. The way Kane's hands moved when he talked, gesturing exactly like Gary did during business presentations. The analytical way he approached problems, breaking them down into logical components. The quiet intensity that Gary recognized from his own youth. "You're my son," Gary whispered. "I figured it out months ago, but I wasn't sure until I saw you walk into the hospital. It was like looking into the future, seeing what I'll look like in 29 years. Gary set down the photograph, his hands shaking. 15 years. He'd had a son for 15 years and never known. All those birthdays he'd missed, all those school plays and basketball games and bedtime stories. All those nights when a little boy might have wondered why his father didn't want him. Does your mother know that you know? I think she suspects. Sometimes I catch her watching me, like she's afraid I'm going to ask questions she's not ready to answer." Kane's voice cracked slightly. "Mr. Thomas, Gary, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Anything. If you had known about me, would you have wanted me?" The question hung in the air between them like a bridge that could either connect them or collapse under the weight of truth. Gary looked at this remarkable young man, intelligent, mature, caring enough to call a stranger in the middle of the night to save his mother's life, and felt 15 years of regret crystallize into something sharp and painful. "Kane, I would have moved heaven and earth to be part of your life. I would have given up everything, my business, my plans, everything, to be your father. But Mom didn't think so. No, she didn't, and I understand why." Gary rubbed his face with both hands, feeling the weight of his younger self's mistakes. "I was so focused on building my career, on following this rigid timeline I'd created for our life together. I talked about waiting to have children like they were a business acquisition that could be scheduled for maximum convenience. She was scared you'd see me as a mistake. The only mistake was mine, making her feel like she couldn't trust me with the most important news of our lives." Kane reached into the envelope again and pulled out a letter, yellowed with age and worn soft from handling. This was with the photograph. It's addressed to you, but she never sent it. Gary's name was written on the envelope in Dawn's careful handwriting, the ink faded but still legible. His heart hammered against his ribs as he looked at Kane. "Should I read it?" "I think you need to. I think we both need to understand what she was thinking when she left." With trembling fingers, Gary opened the envelope and unfolded 2 pages of notebook paper covered in Dawn's distinctive script. The letter was dated 3 days after she'd disappeared from his life. "My dearest Gary, I'm writing this letter that I'll never send, trying to find words for a conversation I'm too afraid to have. By the time you read this, if you ever read this, I'll be gone, and you'll probably hate me for leaving without explanation. I'm pregnant, 8 weeks pregnant with your baby, and I've known for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of trying to find the courage to tell you, 2 weeks of rehearsing conversations that always end with you looking at me like I've ruined everything we've planned. I know what you're thinking, that I should have told you, that you deserve to know, that we could have figured it out together. And maybe in a perfect world, that's what would have happened. But Gary, I heard you last week when you talked about the Petersons' baby keeping them up all night. I saw your face when your sister announced her pregnancy, and you said you couldn't imagine dealing with that kind of chaos right now. I know you love me. I've never doubted that. But I also know that your love comes with conditions and timelines and 5-year plans. This baby doesn't fit into your schedule, and I can't bear the thought of watching you try to make room for something you're not ready for. I would rather raise our child alone, knowing they were wanted completely, than raise them with a father who sees them as a beautiful mistake that derailed his carefully planned life. I know this makes me a coward. I know I'm making this decision for both of us without giving you a choice. But I also know that some kinds of love require sacrifice, and sometimes the greatest sacrifice is walking away. I love you enough to let you have the life you planned, and I love our baby enough to make sure they never feel like they were anything less than a miracle. Please don't look for me. Please don't make this harder than it already is. All my love, always. Dawn. I'm naming him Cain if it's a boy, because it means acquired or obtained. He will be the most precious thing I've ever obtained, and I want him to know that from the day he's born. Gary's vision blurred as he finished reading. Across the table, Cain sat quietly, watching Gary's face as he processed the weight of Dawn's words and the magnitude of what they'd all lost. She was protecting both of us, Gary said finally, his voice hoarse with emotion. She thought she was saving me from a responsibility I didn't want, and saving you from a father who would resent your existence. Were you ready to be a father at 29? Gary considered the question seriously, remembering the man he'd been. Ambitious, driven, completely focused on external markers of success. Honestly, probably not. But I would have learned. I would have grown up fast because I had to, because you and your mother deserved better than the boy I was. And now I'd give anything for the chance to be your father, to make up for 16 years of missed bedtime stories and soccer games and helping with homework, to be the man you and your mother needed me to be all along. Cain smiled for the first time since Gary had met him, and the resemblance was so strong it took Gary's breath away. There's something else you should know, Cain said. Mom's been asking the nurses about you. Not directly, but Pavati told me she asked if you were still in town, if you'd gone back to your life in the city. What did you tell her? That you checked out of the hotel? Gary's heart sank. You told her I left? No, I told her you checked out of the hotel. I didn't mention that you rented the house on Maple Street, the one that's 2 blocks from our house and has a clear view of the hospital. Gary stared at this remarkable young man who'd inherited his mother's wisdom along with his father's strategic thinking. You want her to think I'm committed to staying, not just visiting. I want her to stop being afraid that you're going to disappear again the moment she needs you most. As they left the diner, walking out into the quiet streets of Millbrook under a canopy of stars that seemed impossibly bright after years of city living, Gary realized that he wasn't just getting to know his son, he was getting to know the man his son had already become. And for the first time since arriving in this small town, Gary began to believe that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to become the father he should have been all along. Chapter 5. The Vigil. The house on Maple Street had probably been charming once, back when families with names like Henderson and McCarthy had filled its rooms with laughter and the smell of Sunday dinners. Now it stood as a testament to practical needs rather than dreams, clean but impersonal, furnished with the kind of generic pieces that came with short-term rentals. Gary stood in the living room looking out the front window at the clear view of Mercy General Hospital 2 blocks away, and realized he was setting up the first real home he'd had since Dawn left him 15 years ago. His penthouse had been beautiful, expensive, perfectly appointed, but it had never been home. Home was wherever Dawn was, and for 15 years that had meant nowhere at all. Gary's phone buzzed with another call from Akacheta Whitmore, his business partner, but he let it go to voicemail like he had the previous 7 calls that day. He could imagine the conversation, concerned questions about the Morrison deal, urgent requests for decisions on the Henderson acquisition, increasingly frantic updates about clients who were demanding Gary's personal attention. None of it mattered. Not anymore. Instead of returning business calls, Gary found himself at Mercy General at 6 a.m. with 2 cups of coffee from the bakery Dawn used to work at 16 years ago. He'd learned that Pavati Nakamura, the night shift nurse, had a daughter in middle school who was struggling with math homework, so he'd brought along some workbooks that might help. "You don't have to do this," Pavati said as she accepted the coffee, but Gary could see the gratitude in her tired eyes. "My pleasure. How is she doing?" "Dawn. Stable. Her blood count is still low, but she's not getting worse. Dr. Blackwell thinks if we could do the transfusion." "She's still refusing?" "Every time we bring it up. Yesterday she asked me to make sure you knew she was grateful you came, but that she wanted you to go back to your life." Gary settled into his now familiar chair in the family waiting area. "Did you tell her I'm not leaving?" "I told her that some people are worth waiting for, even when they don't want to be waited for." Over the following days, Gary established a routine that revolved entirely around the rhythm of the hospital. He learned which nurses worked which shifts, brought coffee for the staff on duty, and somehow managed to run his multi-million-dollar business from a waiting room chair using nothing but his laptop and unwavering determination. Chenoa Cross, his assistant, was handling most of the day-to-day operations with the kind of competence that reminded Gary why he'd hired her 5 years ago. But the bigger decisions, the strategic moves that required his personal attention, were piling up like storm clouds on the horizon. "Gary, you need to come back," Akacheta said during one of their video conferences. "The Morrison deal is falling apart. The Henderson acquisition has a deadline we're going to miss. The board is asking questions I don't know how to answer." Gary looked up from his laptop to see Kane walking down the hospital corridor, returning from his daily visit with his mother. The boy moved with the kind of quiet strength that came from carrying responsibilities too heavy for 16-year-old shoulders, and Gary felt his chest tighten with pride and regret in equal measure. "Handle the Morrison deal however you think best. Postpone Henderson, and tell the board I'm taking a leave of absence." "A leave of absence? Gary, you don't take leave. You've never taken leave. You once conducted a merger negotiation from a hospital bed with food poisoning." Things change. That afternoon, Gary found himself in the hospital cafeteria with Bodaway Tulin, Dawn's younger brother. Bodaway was built like a linebacker but had the gentle eyes of someone who'd spent his life protecting people smaller than himself. He worked construction, coached Little League on weekends, and had been splitting his time between the hospital and taking care of Kane and Stacy since Dawn got sick. "You look like you've been sleeping in that chair," Bodaway observed, stirring sugar into coffee that could probably strip paint. "Haven't been sleeping much anywhere. Dawn knows, you know, that you're here every day. Pavati tells her everything, how you bring coffee for the staff, how you helped fix Mrs. Patterson's wheelchair in the lobby, how you paid for the Martinez family's parking fees when their grandmother was in surgery." Gary shrugged. "It's nothing. It's not nothing to them, and it's not nothing to her." Bodaway leaned back in his chair, studying Gary with the kind of direct assessment that came from years of measuring whether people could be trusted with the things that mattered most. "What I can't figure out is why you're doing it." "Because I love her. Lot of men claim to love my sister, Most of them loved the idea of her more than they loved her reality. Gary considered this, thinking about the man he'd been 15 years ago, so focused on his vision of their perfect future that he'd missed the imperfect, beautiful present they were actually living. I think you're right. I think I loved the woman I wanted her to become instead of appreciating the woman she already was. And now? Now I'm trying to understand who she became without me, and maybe figure out if there's a place for me in the life she's built. Bodaway nodded slowly. She's not the same woman who left you, you know. She's stronger now, more independent. She doesn't need anyone to take care of her. I'm beginning to understand that. Are you? Because the Dawn who left you was a 24-year-old girl who was afraid of disappointing people. The Dawn in that hospital bed is a 42-year-old woman who spent 18 years proving she doesn't need anyone's approval or support to build a good life. Gary thought about this as he watched families navigate the cafeteria, some celebrating good news, others comforting each other through the worst days of their lives, all of them connected by love and loyalty, and the simple act of showing up when showing up was hard. What does she need, then? That's what you need to figure out. But Gary, whatever you do, don't try to fix her. She's not broken. She's just scared that letting you back into her life means going backwards instead of forwards. That evening, Gary encountered Stacy in the hospital lobby. Dawn's 14-year-old daughter was curled up in a corner chair, supposedly doing homework but actually staring out the window at the setting sun. She had her mother's fierce intelligence and her own particular brand of protective skepticism. "My mom's been asking about you," Stacy said without preamble as Gary sat down nearby. "What kind of questions?" "Whether you're really staying or just visiting. Whether you have a family back in the city. Whether you're the kind of man who keeps his promises." Gary felt the weight of 16 years' worth of questions he'd never had the chance to answer. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I didn't know yet, that it was too early to tell what kind of man you really are." Stacy closed her textbook and looked at him directly. "But I've been watching you for a week now. You sit in that waiting room for 12 hours a day even though she won't see you. You bring coffee to nurses who work 18-hour shifts. You helped Mr. Patterson from 3B get his insurance paperwork sorted out when his family couldn't figure it out. Those are small things. No, they're not. They're the things that show what someone's really like when they think nobody's paying attention." Gary smiled despite the heaviness in his chest. "You're very wise for 14. I had to grow up fast. When your mom gets sick a lot and your brother has to work after school to help pay bills, you learn to see people clearly pretty quickly." "And what do you see when you look at me?" Stacy considered this with the kind of serious thought that reminded Gary painfully of Dawn. "I see someone who's trying to make up for lost time, but I also see someone who's not sure how to do it without messing everything up again." That night, Gary sat in his rental house, looking across the small yard toward the home where Dawn had raised their children without him. Lights glowed in the windows, Kane doing homework at the kitchen table, Stacy practicing piano in the living room, Denoma, Dawn's mother, moving through domestic routines that spoke of love and stability and all the things Gary had missed. He opened his laptop and began typing an email to Akacheta, authorizing his business partner to make decisions that would have been unthinkable just 2 weeks ago. Gary was dismantling the empire he'd spent 15 years building, not out of impulse or guilt, but out of a clear-eyed understanding that some things were more valuable than success. His phone rang. Dawn's number. For a moment, Gary's heart leaped with hope that she was finally ready to talk to him. Instead, it was Kane's voice, tight with fear. "Gary, can you come to the hospital? Something's wrong with Mom." Gary was out the door before Kane finished speaking, running through the quiet streets of Millbrook toward the hospital where the woman he'd never stopped loving was fighting for her life. and where his son was waiting for the father he'd called in the darkness. Chapter 6. The First Proposal. Dawn was awake when Gary burst through the doors of the ICU, her dark eyes alert and focused in a way they hadn't been since he'd arrived in Millbrook 2 weeks ago. The crisis had passed. Dr. Blackwell explained that Dawn's body had finally responded to the medications, her immune system backing down from its destructive assault on her blood cells. Her numbers were stabilizing, her color was returning, and for the first time since Gary had seen her in that hospital bed, she looked like she might actually survive. "The transfusion isn't urgent anymore," Dr. Blackwell told Gary quietly as they stood outside Dawn's room. "Her body seems to be healing itself. It's not common, but it happens sometimes. The immune system just stops attacking." Gary felt a mixture of relief and loss. Relief that Dawn was going to live, but loss because his blood was no longer necessary for her survival. The one thing he could offer her, the one way he could save her life, was no longer needed. "Can I see her?" Dr. Blackwell hesitated. "She's asked for you. But Gary, she's been through a lot. Don't expect—" "I know." Gary pushed open the door to room 427 and stepped into the space that had become the center of his universe. Dawn was sitting up in bed, no longer connected to the frightening array of machines that had been keeping her alive. She looked fragile but alert, and when she saw him, her expression was unreadable. "Hello, Gary." Her voice was hoarse from the breathing tube that had been removed that morning, but it was still the voice that had haunted his dreams for 15 years. "Hello, Dawn." They stared at each other across the hospital room, 15 years of separation hanging between them like a canyon that might be impossible to cross. "Kane told me you've been here every day," Dawn said finally. "I told you I wasn't leaving." People say a lot of things in hospitals. The crisis makes everything seem more dramatic than it really is. Gary moved closer to her bed, noting how she tracked his movement with wary eyes. She was afraid of him, he realized. Not physically afraid, but afraid of what his presence might mean, what changes it might bring to the life she'd carefully constructed. "This isn't drama, Dawn. This is me trying to make up for the biggest mistake of my life." "Which mistake was that?" "Making you feel like you couldn't trust me with the truth about our son." Dawn's breath caught, and her hands tightened on the bed sheets. "Kane told you. He figured it out himself. Did you really think he wouldn't?" "He looks exactly like me, Dawn. He has my hands, my way of thinking through problems, even the way he tilts his head when he's concentrating." "I was going to tell you," Dawn said quietly. "When I was pregnant, I rehearsed the conversation 1,000 times, but every time I tried to imagine your reaction. You imagined I'd be angry, disappointed. I imagined you'd do the right thing. Marry me because you had to, not because you wanted to. Build a life with me out of obligation instead of love. And I couldn't bear the thought of our child growing up feeling like he was the reason his father had to give up his dreams." Gary sank into the chair beside her bed, the weight of understanding settling on his shoulders like a heavy coat. "So you gave up your dreams instead." "I found new dreams. Better dreams. Tell me about them." For the next hour, Dawn talked about the life she'd built, nursing school while pregnant, the tiny apartment above the bakery, the night shifts that allowed her to be home with Kane during the day. She told him about Stacy, the little girl she'd fostered when Kane was 8, and eventually adopted when it became clear Stacy's birth mother wasn't coming back. "She wasn't supposed to be permanent," Dawn said, her voice soft with love. "She was just going to stay with us until they found her a forever family. But Kane fell in love with her immediately. He taught her to ride a bike, helped her with her homework, protected her from the nightmares that came from whatever had happened in her previous placements. And you fell in love with her, too. How could I not? She was this fierce little girl who'd been through so much, but still believed in fairy tales and happy endings. She made our family complete in a way I didn't even know we were incomplete. Gary listened to Dawn describe their life, school plays and basketball games, family dinners and bedtime stories, quiet Sunday mornings and chaotic Christmas mornings. It sounded like everything he'd never known he wanted, everything he'd been too focused on, success to recognize as success itself. Dawn, Gary said when she'd finished talking, I need to tell you something. She tensed as if preparing for another blow. I've spent 15 years building a business empire. I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. I've got a penthouse in the city, a house in the Hamptons, more success than I ever dreamed of when we were in college. I'm happy for you. None of it means anything. None of it has ever meant anything because the only success that mattered was the one I lost when you walked out of my life. Dawn's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't speak. Gary reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Dawn's eyes widened as he opened it, revealing a ring that was nothing like the one he would have chosen 15 years ago. This wasn't about size or expense. It was a simple solitaire on a platinum band, elegant and timeless, and chosen specifically for the woman Dawn had become rather than the girl she'd been. Marry me, Dawn. The words hung in the air between them like a prayer and a plea. Gary, I know I'm 15 years too late. I know I failed you when you needed me most. But I'm here now and I'm not going anywhere. Marry me. Let me be the husband you deserved all along, the father Cain should have had from the beginning. Gary slipped from his chair onto one knee beside her hospital bed, holding the ring box like an offering. I'll move here permanently. I'll sell my business if I have to. I'll coach Kane's basketball team and help Stacy with her homework and take care of you the way you've been taking care of everyone else for the past 15 years. Dawn stared at the ring, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, Gary allowed himself to hope. She was considering it. He could see the longing in her eyes, the part of her that had never stopped loving him despite everything. You think you can just show up and fix everything with a proposal? Dawn's voice was quiet but steady. I think I can spend the rest of my life trying to make up for the years I lost. And what happens when your business needs you? When some deal becomes more important than parent-teacher conferences and dance recitals. That won't happen. It did before. Dawn's voice was gentle but firm. You had priorities then, and they didn't include a pregnant girlfriend who would tie you down. I didn't know. I couldn't risk telling you and watching you choose your career over our baby. Dawn turned away from him, looking out the window at the small town that had become her home. I won't put my children through that uncertainty. Gary felt his heart breaking all over again, but this time he understood why. He was asking Dawn to trust him based on promises and good intentions. But she needed more than that. She needed proof that the man he'd become was different from the man he'd been. Dawn, please. Gary, I need you to listen to me very carefully. She turned back to face him, her eyes clear and determined. I do love you. I never stopped loving you. But love isn't enough anymore. I can't marry someone just because we love each other and have a child together. Then what do you need? I need to know that you're choosing this life, really choosing it, not just running from your old one. I need to know that you understand what you're asking for. This isn't a fairy tale romance, Gary. This is grocery shopping and orthodontist appointments and teenagers who slam doors when they're angry. Gary stood slowly, the ring box still in his hand. I want all of it. The ordinary days, the difficult moments, everything. You think you do, but you've been here 2 weeks. You've put your entire life on hold. But what happens when you miss your old life? When small-town living isn't enough anymore? That won't happen. You can't know that, and I can't risk my children's hearts on what might be. Dawn reached out and gently touched his hand, her fingers warm against his skin. I need to know that you're not just running to me. I need to know you're running toward the life we'd build together. There's a difference, and until you understand what that difference is, I can't say yes." Gary closed the ring box and put it back in his pocket, but he didn't move away from her bedside. "What do I need to do?" "You need to figure out who you are when you're not trying to win me back. You need to build a life here that's about more than just proving you've changed, and you need to do it without any guarantee that I'll ever be part of it." "And if I do that?" Dawn smiled, and for a moment she looked like the girl he'd fallen in love with in college. "Then maybe we'll have something real to build on instead of just memories and regret." As Gary left the hospital that evening, walking through the quiet streets of Millbrook under a canopy of stars that seemed impossibly bright after years of city living, he realized that Dawn had just given him the most valuable gift she could offer. She'd given him the truth about what love really required and the chance to prove he was finally man enough to provide it. Chapter 7. Learning to Listen. The morning Dawn came home from the hospital. Gary watched from his kitchen window as Kane helped his mother from the passenger seat of Bodaway's pickup truck, one careful hand on her elbow as she navigated the 3 steps to her front porch. She moved slowly, still weak from her month-long battle with her immune system, but there was something in the set of her shoulders that spoke of quiet triumph. She had survived. She was home. And she had done it, as she had done everything else for the past 15 years, on her own terms and in her own way. Gary poured himself a cup of coffee and settled at his kitchen table, close enough to see Dawn's house but far enough away to respect the boundaries she'd drawn. He'd been in Millbrook for 3 weeks now, and he was beginning to understand that proximity wasn't the same thing as presence, that loving someone meant learning when to step forward and when to step back. His phone buzzed with a text from Akecheta. "Morrison deal officially dead. Henderson acquisition moved to Q3. Board meeting scheduled for Friday to discuss your extended absence. You need to call me." Gary set the phone aside without responding. Let the board meet. Let them discuss his absence. For the first time in his adult life, Gary had priorities that had nothing to do with profit margins and market share. Instead of returning business calls, Gary spent his morning learning the rhythm of Dawn's household from a distance. Kane left at 7:30 for school, walking with the easy confidence of a young man who'd grown up knowing he was loved and valued. Stacy followed 20 minutes later, her backpack loaded with books and her head held high with the particular pride of a child who'd been chosen and claimed by a family that wanted her. At 9 o'clock, Donna Matulin arrived with a covered casserole dish and stayed for an hour, helping her daughter navigate the transition from hospital patient to recovering woman. Gary could see them through the kitchen window, Dawn sitting at the table in a shaft of morning sunlight, while her mother moved around the kitchen with the kind of efficient care that came from decades of taking care of people she loved. When Donoma left, Dawn was alone. Gary waited 15 minutes, then walked across the yard that separated their houses, carrying a thermos of coffee and his own uncertainty about whether he was welcome. He knocked softly on Dawn's front door and waited, listening to the sound of her footsteps approaching. She opened the door wearing an old college sweatshirt that made Gary's heart clench with recognition. It was his sweatshirt, the one she'd borrowed during their sophomore year and never returned. The fact that she still had it, that she was wearing it on her first day home from the hospital, felt like either hope or torture. "Gary, I brought coffee. The good kind from the bakery where you used to work." Dawn hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let him in. Her house was everything Gary had imagined it would be, warm and lived in, filled with the kind of comfortable chaos that came from raising 2 children while working full-time. Books were stacked on every available surface, family photos covered the refrigerator, and a basket of clean laundry waited to be folded on the couch. It was a home in the truest sense of the word, and Gary felt like an intruder in its comfortable intimacy. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling carefully into a chair across from where Dawn had curled up on the couch. Tired, weak, but grateful to be here instead of listening to monitors beep all night. The kids must be relieved. Kane hasn't slept through the night since I got sick. And Stacy's been doing everyone's laundry and cooking dinner without being asked. Dawn's voice was thick with the particular guilt that came from being the kind of mother who hated burdening her children with adult responsibilities. They've been taking care of me instead of the other way around. They love you. Taking care of people we love is what we do. Is that what you're doing? Taking care of me? Gary considered the question seriously. I'm trying to figure out what you need from me, and I'm beginning to think it's not what I assumed it would be. Over the following days, Gary developed a new routine. Instead of spending 12 hours a day in the hospital waiting room, he found other ways to be present in Dawn's world without overwhelming it. He learned that the mailbox at the end of her driveway had a loose post, so he spent a morning fixing it without being asked. When her ancient Honda started making concerning noises, he arranged for it to be serviced while she was at a doctor's appointment. Most importantly, he began building relationships with Kane and Stacy that existed independently of his desire to win back their mother. "You don't have to try so hard," Stacy told him one afternoon when he picked her up from school because Dawn was too tired to drive. "We already like you." "You do?" "Kane told me what you did with the insurance stuff when Mom was in the hospital, how you called them every day until they approved the treatment she needed. And Pavati said you paid for parking for the Martinez family during their grandmother's surgery." Gary had hoped those gestures would go unnoticed, acts of service rather than performance. The fact that Stacy had heard about them from other people rather than from him seemed to matter to her. "Your mom raised remarkable kids," Gary said as they pulled into the driveway. "She did. And you know what the best part is?" "What?" "She doesn't even realize how remarkable we are. She just thinks this is what normal families are like, supporting each other, showing up when things get difficult, choosing to love each other every day even when it's hard." That evening, Gary found himself sitting on his front porch as the sun set over Millbrook, watching the ordinary magic of a Tuesday evening in a small town. Children rode bicycles on sidewalks while their parents called them in for dinner. Elderly couples walked hand in hand past houses where families were settling into the comfortable rhythm of homework and television and the thousand small rituals that made up a life. Dawn appeared on her own front porch, wrapped in a shawl that made her look like something out of a painting. She settled into her porch swing and began reading, occasionally looking up to wave at neighbors walking past. "Beautiful evening," Gary called across the yard that separated them. "It is," Dawn replied, not setting down her book but not dismissing him either. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the neighborhood, each absorbed in their own thoughts, but somehow connected by the shared experience of being present in the same moment, in the same place. "Gary," Dawn said eventually, her voice carrying clearly through the quiet evening air. "Yes? Why are you really here?" It was the question Gary had been asking himself every day since arriving in Millbrook. Why had he dropped everything to drive through a storm to save a woman who didn't want to be saved? Why was he dismantling the empire he'd spent 15 years building? Why was he learning the names of nurses and fixing mailboxes and sitting on a small-town porch instead of negotiating deals in boardrooms? Because for 15 years, I've been successful at everything except the thing that mattered most, which was building a life worth living instead of just a career worth bragging about. Dawn closed her book and looked at him directly. "And you think I'm the key to that life?" "I think you showed me what that life could look like, and I've been trying to find my way back to it ever since. Gary, I need you to understand something." Dawn's voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not the same woman who left you 15 years ago. I'm not waiting for someone to complete me or rescue me or make my life better. I've already built a good life, a complete life. I know that. Do you? Because sometimes when you look at me, I see the same expression you used to get when you talked about our future together, like, I'm a problem to be solved or a goal to be achieved. Gary felt the truth of her words hit him like a physical blow. Even now, even after everything he'd learned, part of him was still approaching their relationship like a business negotiation, strategizing ways to win her back instead of simply learning to love her as she was. You're right, he said quietly. I've been trying to convince you that I've changed instead of just changing. What would just changing look like? Gary considered the question as fireflies began blinking in the gathering darkness, tiny points of light that appeared and disappeared like thoughts taking shape. I think it would look like building a life here that has nothing to do with winning you back. Finding out who I am in this town, with these people, when I'm not performing or proving anything. And if that life doesn't include me, then it would still be a better life than the one I was living before I came here. Dawn smiled, and even in the darkness, Gary could see that it was the first, completely unguarded smile she'd given him since he'd arrived in Millbrook. That's the first thing you've said that doesn't sound like a business proposal. Maybe because it's the first time I've stopped thinking of you as something I need to acquire and started thinking of you as someone I want to know. They talked until nearly midnight, their voices carrying back and forth across the small yard like a bridge being built, one word at a time. Dawn told him about her work at the hospital, the patients she'd cared for and lost, the families she'd comforted through their darkest hours. Gary found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone, his loneliness in success, his fear that he'd built his entire identity around achievements that ultimately didn't matter. When Dawn finally went inside, Gary remained on his porch for another hour, listening to the quiet sounds of a town settling into sleep and feeling something he hadn't experienced in 15 years. The possibility that he might actually be exactly where he belonged. Chapter 8. The Second Proposal. The Millbrook Harvest Festival transformed the town square into something that belonged in a Norman Rockwell painting, complete with hay bales, pumpkin displays, and the kind of community spirit that Gary had read about but never experienced. He'd been in town for 6 weeks now, long enough to understand that events like this weren't just celebrations. They were the threads that wove individual lives into the fabric of something larger and more meaningful than the sum of its parts. Gary found himself assigned to the apple cider booth alongside Dawn, working together for the first time as partners rather than adversaries navigating the minefield of their shared past. "Hand me that ladle," Dawn said, her cheeks flushed from the steam rising from the large pot of mulled cider they were serving to an endless stream of neighbors and visitors. Gary complied, noting how naturally she commanded the space, how people gravitated toward her warmth and competence. Mrs. Henderson from the bank stopped by to thank Dawn for sitting with her husband during his surgery recovery. The high school principal mentioned how much he appreciated Dawn volunteering for the literacy program. 3 different families made sure to tell Dawn how much their elderly relatives enjoyed her visits when they were homebound. Watching Dawn in her element, Gary realized he was seeing her as others saw her. Not as the young woman who'd left him, not as the sick patient he'd rushed to save, but as the pillar of strength she'd become in this community that loved and depended on her. "You're staring," Dawn said quietly during a brief lull in the crowd. "I'm admiring. There's a difference." "Gary? I know, I know. No pressure, no expectations. I'm proud of you, of who you've become." Dawn's expression softened. "It wasn't easy. Building this life, finding my place here. There were times when I wondered if I'd made the right choice, leaving everything familiar behind. Do you regret it now?" "Number never." Dawn's voice was firm with conviction. "This is home. These people, this community, they saw me as I was and loved me anyway. They didn't try to change me or improve me or turn me into someone else's vision of who I should be. Gary heard the implicit criticism in her words and accepted it as deserved. The man he'd been 15 years ago probably would have tried to mold Dawn into his idea of the perfect corporate wife, encouraging her to abandon nursing for something more prestigious, pressuring her to conform to his world instead of building a world together. The afternoon passed in a blur of apple cider and conversation, pumpkin carving contests, and live music from a local bluegrass band. Gary found himself swept up in the simple pleasure of being part of something, of contributing to an event that brought joy to people he was beginning to think of as neighbors rather than strangers. As evening approached and the festival began to wind down, the town square was transformed once again, strings of lights casting a warm glow over couples dancing to soft music played by the high school jazz ensemble. It was the kind of scene that existed in movies and dreams, perfect in its imperfection and beautiful in its ordinariness. "Would you like to dance?" Gary asked, extending his hand to Dawn as they finished cleaning up their booth. Dawn hesitated, and Gary saw the war playing out behind her eyes, the part of her that had never stopped loving him, battling with the part that had learned to protect herself from hope. "Just a dance," Gary said gently. "No ulterior motives, no hidden agenda. Just two people who used to dance together, remembering what that felt like." Dawn took his hand. They moved on to the small dance floor that had been created in front of the gazebo, joining other couples swaying to music that seemed designed for moments exactly like this. Gary pulled Dawn close, not too close, respecting the boundaries she'd established while savoring the miracle of holding her again. She fit against him perfectly, just as she always had. Her head reached exactly to his shoulder, her hand rested naturally over his heart, and for a few minutes Gary allowed himself to forget about the years of separation and simply exist in the present moment with the woman he'd never stopped loving. "Do you remember the last time we danced?" Dawn asked, her voice soft against his chest. "Your graduation party. You were wearing that blue dress, the one with the tiny flowers." "I can't believe you remember that dress." "I remember everything about that night. How happy you were, how proud I was to be with you, how we talked about all the places we'd go together, all the things we'd do. We were so young." "We were. But some things don't change, Dawn. Some feelings don't fade just because time passes." Dawn pulled back slightly to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Around them, other couples continued to dance, lost in their own private worlds of love and connection. "Gary, I need to tell you something." "What?" "These past 6 weeks, watching you here, seeing how you fit into our community, it's been harder than I expected." Gary's heart clenched. "Harder how?" "Harder to remember why I need to keep my walls up. Harder to convince myself that trusting you again would be a mistake." The music swelled around them, and Gary felt something shift in the space between them. Not resolution, but possibility. The kind of fragile hope that could either bloom into something beautiful or shatter at the slightest wrong move. "Dawn, let me finish." She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "You've been different here, patient, present. You've become part of Kane's life without trying to replace anything, just adding to what was already there. You've been kind to Stacy without expecting her to instantly accept you as family. You've respected my boundaries even when I know it's been difficult." Gary hardly dared to breathe, afraid that any movement might break the spell of her honesty. "But Gary, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same woman who left you 15 years ago. I'm stronger now, more independent. I don't need anyone to take care of me or fix my problems or make my life complete. I know that. Do you? Because sometimes when you look at me, I still see traces of the old Gary, the one who had a plan for our life that didn't include room for surprises or detours." The song ended, but they remained in each other's arms as couples around them either separated or moved into position for the next dance. "You're right," Gary said quietly. "Part of me is still that man. Part of me still wants to give you the perfect life I planned for us when we were 24. But Dawn, I'm learning that perfect isn't what matters. What matters is real. What does real look like to you?" Gary considered the question seriously, looking around at the festival that was winding down around them. Families packing up their picnic blankets, teenagers reluctant to let the evening end, elderly couples walking hand in hand toward homes they'd shared for decades. Real looks like this: community, belonging, being part of something larger than yourself, but not losing yourself in the process. Dawn smiled, and Gary felt his heart skip in response to the genuine warmth in her expression. "That's a good answer. Dawn, I need to ask you something, and I need you to know that I'll respect whatever answer you give." She tensed slightly, as if preparing for another proposal she wasn't ready to accept. Gary reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the ring box, but this time he didn't drop to one knee. Instead, he held it between them like an offering rather than a demand. "I know I asked you this before, and you said no for good reasons. But I need to ask again because I hope, that something has changed between us. Gary, I'm not asking you to marry the man who left you pregnant and afraid 15 years ago. I'm not asking you to fit into the life I had planned for us back then. I'm asking you to marry the man I've become. The man who wants to build a new life with you here, in this community that you love, surrounded by the people who've supported you and the children we're raising together." Dawn stared at the ring box, her expression unreadable. "I want to coach Kane's basketball team and help Stacy with her college applications. I want to volunteer at the literacy center with you and grow old on front porches where we can wave at neighbors walking by. I want ordinary days and extraordinary moments and everything in between. Gary, I love you, Dawn. Not the memory of who you were, but the woman you are right now. Strong, independent, completely capable of living a beautiful life without me. But I'm hoping you might want to live an even more beautiful life with me." Dawn took the ring box from his hands, opening it to reveal the simple solitaire he'd chosen with such care weeks ago. In the soft light of the festival lanterns, the diamond caught the glow and threw it back in tiny rainbows that danced across her face. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "Does that mean—" "Gary, I love you too. I've never stopped loving you, not even when I was angry, not even when I was scared." Gary's heart soared with hope. "But I can't say yes. Not yet." The hope crashed as quickly as it had risen. "Why?" Dawn handed the ring box back to him, her eyes bright with tears. "Because you're asking me to trust that you've chosen this life, but I'm not convinced you understand what you're giving up. You've been here 6 weeks, Gary. You've put your entire business empire on hold, but what happens when you miss your old life? When the excitement of small-town living wears off, and you remember what it felt like to close million-dollar deals? That won't happen. You can't know that, and I can't risk my children's hearts or my own on what might happen if you wake up one day and realize you've made a mistake." Gary felt his second proposal failing, just as his first one had, but this time he understood why. Dawn wasn't questioning his love or his sincerity. She was questioning whether the life he was offering was sustainable, whether his transformation was complete, or just a temporary response to crisis. "What do I need to do?" Gary asked quietly. "You need to stop trying to prove you've changed and just change. Build a life here that's about more than winning me back. Find out who Gary Thomas is in Millbrook, Tennessee, when he's not performing for an audience or trying to make up for past mistakes. And if I do that—" Dawn stepped closer to him, close enough that he could see the love and fear warring in her eyes. "Then maybe we'll have something real to build on instead of just promises and good intentions." As the festival ended and families began heading home, Gary walked Dawn to her front door, carrying the rejected ring in his pocket, like a reminder of how much further he still had to go. But this time, instead of feeling defeated, Gary felt something like clarity. Dawn wasn't rejecting him. She was challenging him to become the man she needed him to be, not just temporarily, but permanently. And for the first time since arriving in Millbrook, Gary understood exactly what that meant. Chapter 9. The Test of Time. The call came on a Tuesday morning in November, when the autumn air carried the first promise of winter, and Gary was helping Kane practice free throws in their driveway before school. "Dad, your phone's ringing," Kane said, passing Gary the basketball with the casual ease that had developed over the past 3 months of shared mornings and quiet conversations. "Dad." The word still made Gary's chest tighten with gratitude every time he heard it. It had started tentatively, then grown more natural, until now it felt like the most important title Gary had ever earned. "Gary Thomas," he answered, noting the New York area code. "Gary, thank God. It's Jonathan Morrison from Morrison Technologies. We need to talk." Gary's attention sharpened. Morrison Technologies was the company behind the deal that had fallen through when Gary first arrived in Millbrook, an acquisition that would have been worth $50 million and positioned Gary's firm as a major player in the tech consulting space. "Jonathan, I thought our deal was dead." "It was. But everything's changed. Our primary competitor just had a massive data breach, and we're about to announce the largest government contract in our company's history. Gary, I'm talking about a partnership that could be worth $200 million over the next 5 years. Gary caught the basketball Kane tossed to him, noting the trust in his son's eyes, the easy assumption that Gary would always be there to catch whatever was thrown his way. "That sounds impressive, Jonathan, but I'm not really in the market for new acquisitions right now." "You don't understand. This isn't just about money, though there's plenty of that. This is about positioning your company as the premier consulting firm on the East Coast. This is about everything you've worked for your entire career." Through the kitchen window of Dawn's house, Gary could see her moving around, preparing breakfast for Stacy, while simultaneously packing lunches and checking homework. She moved with the efficient grace of a woman who'd spent years orchestrating the complex dance of family life, and Gary felt his heart clench with love and admiration. "Jonathan, I appreciate the offer, but before you say no, you should know that this would require relocating to Silicon Valley for at least 2 years, full immersion, hands-on management. But Gary, we're talking about the deal of a lifetime." Gary felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd built over 15 years of strategic planning and careful cultivation, was being offered to him on a silver platter. The old Gary would have been on a plane to California within hours. "I'm not interested," Gary said quietly. "What?" "Gary, did you hear what I just said? $200 million. The deal of a lifetime." "I heard you, and I'm not interested." "Have you lost your mind? This is everything we've discussed, everything you've been building toward." Gary ended the call and turned off his phone, pocketing it without a second thought. Kane was studying him with the perceptive intelligence he'd inherited from both his parents. "Everything okay, Dad?" "Everything's perfect." What Gary didn't know was that Dawn had been standing at her kitchen window, close enough to hear his side of the conversation through the open window. She'd listened to him turn down what sounded like the opportunity of a lifetime without hesitation, without even asking for time to consider it. Later that morning, after Kane and Stacy had left for school, Dawn appeared on Gary's front porch with 2 cups of coffee and an expression he couldn't read. "Can we talk?" They settled on Gary's porch swing, the one he'd installed the previous week, because he'd noticed Dawn reading on her own swing most evenings and thought it would be nice to have his own quiet space to think. "I heard your phone conversation this morning," Dawn said without preamble. Gary tensed. Dawn, it's not what you might think. It sounded like someone offering you a lot of money to leave Millbrook. $200 million, actually, over 5 years. Dawn set down her coffee cup, her hands trembling slightly. And you turned it down? Without a second thought. Gary, do you have any idea what you just did? I chose my family over my business. I chose the life I'm building here over the life I used to think I wanted. Dawn stood abruptly, pacing to the porch railing and gripping it like an anchor. You can't do that. Do what? Give up that kind of opportunity for me. For us. I won't let you sacrifice your entire career. Dawn, it's not a sacrifice if it's a choice. She spun to face him, tears streaming down her face. But what if it is? What if 5 years from now you wake up and realize what you gave up? What if you start to resent me for being the reason you walked away from the biggest deal of your career? Gary stood and moved toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. I've been watching you for 3 months, Gary. Watching you build a life here. Watching you become part of our community. And I've been falling in love with you all over again. Gary's heart leaped with hope. But I've also been terrified, because you're not just changing your life, you're completely dismantling who you used to be. And I'm not sure that's fair to either of us. Dawn. You were brilliant at what you did, successful beyond most people's wildest dreams. You built an empire from nothing, and you were good at it. You loved the challenge, the strategy, the thrill of closing impossible deals. I love our life here more. Do you? Or do you just think you should love it more? Gary felt like he was trying to navigate a minefield where every step might destroy the very thing he was trying to reach. I don't understand what you're asking me. I'm asking you to be honest with yourself about who you really are. Not who you think I want you to be, not who you think you should be, but who you actually are. Dawn wiped her eyes, struggling to articulate the fear that had been growing in her heart for weeks. The man I fell in love with in college was ambitious and driven and excited about conquering the world. I was attracted to your passion, your intelligence, your determination to build something meaningful. And now I see you trying to be someone completely different, someone content with small-town life and weekend barbecues and coaching Little League. And while that person is wonderful, I'm not sure he's you. Gary sank back onto the porch swing, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. So what are you saying? That you want me to leave? Take the deal? I'm saying I want you to be sure that the life you're choosing is the life you actually want, not just the life you think will make me happy. And if I'm sure? Dawn sat beside him on the swing, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of her shampoo, far enough away that he couldn't touch her without crossing a boundary she'd established. Then I'll believe you. But Gary, I need you to prove it to yourself first. Not to me, to yourself. That afternoon, Gary found himself walking through downtown Millbrook, seeing it through new eyes. Was this really where he wanted to spend the rest of his life? Was he genuinely content with coaching basketball and volunteering at the literacy center, or was he just playing a role he thought would win Dawn back? He stopped at Rosie's Diner, where the conversation with his son had revealed the truth about his parentage 2 months ago. The same red vinyl booths, the same black and white checkered floor, the same sense of being connected to something larger than himself. "Gary," called out Mrs. Patterson from the corner booth, "how's that young man of yours doing with his college applications?" "Kane's doing great. He's got his heart set on State University." "And Stacy? I heard she's been accepted into that advanced math program." "She has. Dawn's so proud. She's been telling everyone who'll listen." Gary settled into a booth and ordered coffee, realizing that somewhere in the past 3 months, these people had stopped being strangers he was trying to impress and started being neighbors he genuinely cared about. Mrs. Patterson's grandson was struggling in school, and Gary had been helping him with reading comprehension on Saturday mornings. The Martinez family had needed help navigating insurance paperwork when their father was injured, and Gary had spent hours on the phone with bureaucrats until everything was sorted out. None of it had been performance. All of it had been choice. When Gary's phone buzzed with another call, this time from his sister, Winona Thomas Sterling, he answered immediately. "Gary, thank God. Akacheta called me about some deal you turned down. Are you having a nervous breakdown?" "Hello to you too, Winona." His sister, a successful attorney in Chicago, had never minced words. At 46, she was 2 years older than Gary and had spent most of their adult lives trying to manage his career from a distance. "Don't hello me. Akacheta said you turned down $200 million to stay in some small town chasing after a woman who won't even marry you." "It's more complicated than that." "Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're throwing away everything you've worked for because you can't let go of some college girlfriend who clearly doesn't want you back." Gary felt his jaw tighten. "You don't know Dawn. You don't know anything about this situation. I know you've been gone for 4 months. I know you've missed every family gathering, every business obligation, every opportunity that's come your way. And for what? A woman who keeps saying no every time you propose? Winona, Mom would be horrified, Gary. She raised us to be practical, to make smart choices. This isn't smart." Gary thought about his mother's reaction when she'd met Dawn and the children, the approval in her eyes when she'd seen the life he was building. "Actually, Mom approves. She's met Dawn and the kids. She understands what I'm trying to build here. That's another thing. Kids? Gary, you're 44 years old. You don't just suddenly become a father to teenagers. Do you have any idea what you're signing up for?" The dismissive way Winona talked about Kane and Stacy made Gary's chest tighten with protective anger. "I'm signing up for a family, something you might understand if you ever put down your briefcase long enough to build relationships that matter more than billable hours." "That's unfair." "Is it?" "When's the last time you called just to talk, Winona? When's the last time you visited? You're lecturing me about practical choices. But what's practical about building a fortune you never have time to enjoy with people who actually love you?" That evening, Gary knocked on Dawn's door, finding her in the kitchen helping Stacy with algebra homework while simultaneously preparing dinner and sorting through mail. "Can I help with anything?" Gary asked. "Actually, yes." Dawn looked up from the equation she'd been explaining. "Stacy's been struggling with this unit, and I was never great at advanced math." Gary settled at the kitchen table beside Stacy, walking her through the problem with the same patience he'd once used to explain complex business strategies to executives who couldn't see the bigger picture. "You're really good at this," Stacy said when the concept finally clicked. "I've always been good with numbers. It's part of what made me successful in business. Do you miss it? The business stuff?" Gary glanced at Dawn, who was stirring something on the stove, but clearly listening to their conversation. "I miss some parts of it. The intellectual challenge, the satisfaction of solving complex problems. But I don't miss the pressure or the constant travel or the feeling that nothing was ever enough." "What do you like about being here?" Gary considered the question seriously, looking around the kitchen where homework was spread across the table and dinner was filling the air with the scent of home. "I like feeling useful in ways that matter. In business, I helped companies make more money. Here, I helped Mrs. Patterson's grandson learn to read. I helped your mom navigate insurance bureaucracy when she was sick. I'm helping you understand algebra. Which one makes you happier?" "This one. Definitely this one." Later, after Stacy had gone to bed and Kane was finishing his own homework, Gary found Dawn in her garden, deadheading the last of the season's roses before the first frost. "She's a wise kid," Gary said, settling on the garden bench Dawn had installed near her prize-winning rose bush. She's been through a lot. It makes you wise learning that the people who are supposed to take care of you might not always be able to. Is that what you're afraid of? That I won't be able to take care of you and the kids? Dawn sat beside him, her hands still dirty from working in the soil. I'm afraid that I'm asking you to be someone you're not. That I'm doing to you what I was afraid you'd do to me 15 years ago, asking you to give up essential parts of yourself to fit into my life. Gary took her dirty hands in his clean ones, intertwining their fingers. Dawn, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm not giving up who I am. I'm becoming who I was meant to be. There's a difference. How can you be sure? Because for the first time in my adult life, I wake up every morning excited about the day ahead, not anxious about deals that might fall through or competitors who might outmaneuver me, but excited about helping Kane with his college applications and teaching Stacy to drive and watching you take care of people who need you. Dawn searched his face in the fading light, looking for any sign that he was performing rather than revealing truth. And if you wake up one morning and that's not enough anymore, then I'll tell you, and we'll figure it out together. But Dawn, I don't think that's going to happen. I think I've finally found the life I was supposed to be living all along. As they sat in the garden where Dawn had planted roots deep enough to weather any storm, Gary realized that the test hadn't been whether he could give up his old life for her. It had been whether he could trust himself enough to build a new one with her. And for the first time since arriving in Millbrook, Gary was certain that he could. Chapter 10. The Promise That Matters. Snow was falling on Millbrook when Gary received the call that changed everything. Mr. Thomas, this is Dr. Rebecca Martinez from City General Hospital. I'm calling about your mother, Tallulah Thomas. She's been admitted with a massive stroke. Gary's hand tightened on the phone. His mother, who had called him just last week, who had been the one constant in his life. How bad is it? Very serious. She's in a coma. You should come as soon as possible. After ending the call, Gary felt the weight of impossible choices. His mother was dying 4 hours away, but leaving now would confirm every fear Dawn had about his commitment. Dad, everything okay? Kane appeared in the doorway. My mother, your grandmother, is in the hospital. She's had a stroke. Do you want me to come with you? The simple offer nearly brought Gary to his knees. This remarkable young man was offering to support him without hesitation. You need to stay here. Take care of your mother and Stacy. Tell her I'm coming back. Gary sat beside his mother's hospital bed, watching machines breathe for her. Tallulah Thomas had raised him alone, been his cheerleader and critic. She'd met Dawn in college and mourned when Dawn disappeared from Gary's life. I found her, Mom, Gary whispered. I found Dawn, and I have a son, your grandson, Kane. Gary called Dawn that evening. Would it be okay if I brought her here? To Millbrook. This is home now, Dawn. If she wakes up, I want her to see the life I've built. If she doesn't, I want her surrounded by people who love her son. When Gary returned with his mother in medical transport, half the town was waiting to help. Denoma had prepared his house for long-term care. Bodaway organized volunteers. Pavati arranged private nursing care. But Dawn surprised him most. I want to help, she said, appearing with a casserole and overnight bag. She's family. Over the following weeks, Gary watched Dawn care for his unconscious mother with gentle competence. She talked to Tallulah about the children, read novels, played music, treating Gary's mother as beloved family. Why are you doing this? Gary asked. Because this is what families do. We're not officially family, aren't we? Christmas came quietly. Gary spent the morning watching Kane and Stacy open presents while Dawn prepared a feast. It was everything he'd never known he wanted. That evening, cleaning up wrapping paper, Gary spoke quietly. Dawn, I have something to ask you. Gary, if this is what I think it is, just hear me out. I know I've asked before, and I know why you said no, but I need to ask one more time because I finally understand what's been wrong. Gary knelt beside where Dawn sat on the floor. I kept asking you to trust I'd changed, but I never acknowledged what you were giving up by saying yes. You built something beautiful here, independent, strong, complete, and I keep asking you to risk all of that. Gary pulled out the ring box, hands shaking. Maybe what you need isn't another promise. Maybe you need permission to not have to find out. What do you mean? I should stop asking you to marry me and accept that you might never be ready. And that doesn't make you wrong. It makes you smart. Gary closed the ring box. I'm going to love you and our children for the rest of my life, married or not, whether you ever feel safe enough to say yes or not. Dawn sobbed. That's the most terrifying thing you've ever said to me. Why? Because it means you finally understand that love isn't about getting what you want. It's about wanting what's best for the person you love. Gary, 3 weeks ago, I went to see a lawyer about adoption procedures. I want our family to be legal as well as real. But you said you weren't ready to get married. I wasn't ready to risk my heart again. But watching you with my mother, I realized I've been so afraid of you leaving that I never let myself see how much you'd already stayed. On a Tuesday morning in February, Tallulah opened her eyes. "Gary," she whispered, "I'm here, Mom." Over the next hour, Tallulah met the family Gary had found. Kane, her grandson, Stacy, who offered to play piano, Dawn, who had cared for a stranger out of love. "You came back to her," Tallulah said when they were alone. "I never should have let her go. Are you happy here? Really happy? Happier than I've ever been? Then what are you waiting for?" That evening, Gary found Dawn in her garden, planting spring bulbs. "Dawn, I'm not going to propose to you again." Dawn's hands stilled. "I've been thinking about this wrong. Love is showing up every day, making the choice to love someone over and over again. Love is building a life that includes someone without requiring them to earn their place in it." Gary took her dirt-stained hands. "I'm not asking you to trust me with your future anymore. I'm promising you that your future will include a man who loves you completely and will never leave again. You're not proposing? Number, I'm promising. There's a difference." Dawn stood up and walked into her house without a word. Gary sat alone, wondering if he'd lost her by finally understanding how to love her properly. 20 minutes later, Dawn reappeared. "Gary, can you come here?" Gary found Dawn in her living room, where Kane and Stacy sat with barely contained excitement, and Tallulah was in her wheelchair. Dawn took a deep breath, reaching into her pocket for a simple silver band. "Gary Thomas," she said, dropping to one knee while their family watched. "You've spent 4 months showing me who you are now, not trying to convince me of who you might become. You've loved our children without conditions, and loved me without requirements." Gary's heart stopped. "Will you marry me? Not because we have a child together, but because I want to spend the rest of my life building something beautiful with the man you've become." Gary stared at this incredible woman, offering him everything he'd never known he needed. "Yes," he whispered, then louder. "Yes, forever, yes." As Dawn slipped the ring onto his finger, Kane and Stacy erupted in cheers, and Tallulah clapped with delight. "Thank you," Gary whispered against her lips as they kissed. "For what?" "For making me earn us. For waiting until we were both ready to build something that could last." 6 months later, Gary and Dawn were married in the Millbrook Community Center, surrounded by everyone who had watched their love story unfold. Kane walked his mother down the aisle, Stacy served as maid of honor, and Tallulah gave a toast about second chances and the courage to love again after heartbreak. Their wedding was witnessed by a community that understood the greatest love stories aren't about perfect timing. They're about ordinary people choosing each other over and over again, especially when that choice requires sacrifice and growth, and the patience that comes from understanding some things are worth waiting for. And in a small town in Tennessee, two people who had lost each other and found themselves began the rest of their lives together, surrounded by the family they'd created and the community that had taught them that home isn't a place you find, it's a life you build, one choice at a time, with the people who matter most. The end.